ultimately sell that on to a larger renewable energy developer, owner, operator, somebody like a big company like NextEra, or some of the European companies like Enel and Avangrid and those. So we have lots of relationships with those folks. So what we've typically done is we build utility scale projects. So we've done projects in, well, I guess I've got some bragging stuff here. The last couple of years, we've sold 6 large projects with equivalent of about 2,000 megawatts or 2 gigawatts, as it says there. And in all cases, we find either an anchor landowner as our co-developer and partner. In the case of wind, because in wind you have to aggregate a lot of parcels, as you probably know, in order to build a utility scale wind project. For solar, a lot of times a landowner will have 1,000 acres or 5,000 acres and close to a substation, and we'll partner with that individual. And so, what does that mean? It means that rather than landowners get knocks on the door all the time, as y'all know, about wind, solar, storage, what have you, and a lot of times it's like, which deal should I do? I've got 5 landowners from 5 different companies trying to do a deal on my land, and I don't know what's market. And so what we do is, my partner, Brad, who's also a lawyer, does a lot of leases. So we'll structure the leases where we believe they're very favorable, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we also have the landowners participate in the project development fee. So it's not just a cash stream associated with the lease if you have a solar project or a wind project on your land, but developers get upfront fees and success fees, and so we make sure that those landowners are participating in those fees as well. So there's an alignment of interests. We've worked with NextEra, Hecate, Cordelio Power, which is owned by the Canada Pension Plan, so very large platforms, Leeward, and D.E. Shaw Renewable Energy there. So we know a lot of folks in the sector. I've talked a little bit about, so Brad is our lawyer partner and has done a lot of deals, thousands of megawatts in wind and solar and storage. My background is I started in investment banking about 17 years in New York and Amsterdam and a bunch of other places, and then I got into renewable energy and clean tech in the late thousands, and then I left investment banking in 2013. I went to a company called Tri Global Energy, which is a large wind developer. They're responsible for about 25% of all the wind projects that were developed in Texas, and I was their chief commercial officer for a couple of years. Then I went over to SunShare, which is a community solar platform, actually now the oldest community solar platform in the country. So that's why I'm talking about community solar, because I know a little bit about it. I was their CFO and EVP of strategy for 3 years, and that company developed, while I was there, probably about 40 community solar projects in Minnesota and Colorado. And Minnesota has a really robust community solar platform. Xcel is the utility there and as well in Colorado. So we've done a lot of work with Xcel. So we develop, build, own, and operate these projects. A little bit of a case study. One thing we did with a large landowner, or 2 landowners in Texas, called the Hart Energy project. That's a project that was, they had about 3,000 acres and about 1,500 that we planned for solar. It's a project that was being developed and just kind of sputtered, didn't go anywhere. And so we stepped in and redid the lease and packaged up that transaction. We already had an interconnection queue position. So we went out and talked to half dozen of our relationships, and we ended up going to D.E. Shaw, which is a big hedge fund that has a very large renewable energy platform. They're actually going public later this year. And the reason we decided to go with them was, number one, they accepted the lease terms. They gave us a great deal on the project development fee. And they also had offtake, which means that they had anticipated who was going to be buying the electricity when the solar project was built. So we took that over in the first quarter of last year and transitioned and sold it to D.E. Shaw in the third quarter. Get into a little bit of community solar 101. That's small print, but are people familiar with community solar? Show of hands, kind of know what it is, or are you just all learning about it? Looks like nobody knows. All right, awesome. So I'll start with the basics. So it's kind of like a triangulated relationship among person, like an electric utility customer, the utility itself, and the project owner. So a company like SunShare will say, hey, I'm going to build a 5-megawatt solar project, and I want to contribute that into the community solar platform that's part of the state and part of the utility. So SunShare will develop, build, own, and operate that project, 5 megawatts on roughly 25 acres of land. That's really the sort of the relationship. For every megawatt of solar, you need about 4 to 6 acres of land, depending on the land. So you've got SunShare, which is the project developer, owner, operator. They interconnect into the utility grid. Then SunShare or whoever, any community solar company will go and get subscribers. So Mrs. Smith will say, hey, I want community solar. So she'll sign up for, say, 6 kilowatts of capacity on the solar garden, and then you'll aggregate all of these folks. So you have 1,000 or 2,000 people that are part of the community solar garden, if you will, virtual, right? They're not plugging into the solar project, and they're not getting the electricity directly from the project. They're getting it from Excel, from their utility provider, Alliant, or whomever. So customer pays the project owner for the notional electricity that's being generated under their contract. Project owner, who owns a solar farm, puts their electricity onto the utility's grid. Utility just takes the electricity and uses it as part of its dispatch program. And then the utility gives a credit to the customer that's of the solar garden. So the customer's still getting electricity from the utility company. They're just they're paying the project company, and then they're getting a bill credit on their utility bill to offset the cost of the solar that they notionally or virtually purchased from the project company. Typically, these projects are set up where the customer is getting a discount, so it induces the customer to come in and be a community solar participant. So as I mentioned before, there's about 3.5 gigawatts, 3,500 megawatts of community solar across about 20 states. Minnesota's been really active, Colorado's active, New York State, very years, according to a bunch of folks, it's going to more than double in the next 5 years, community solar. So it's a big market. It's going to get very, very large. We think there's going to be some great programs coming out in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. So folks will be able to, if you have land and you want to participate, it's pretty interesting. So we'll walk through some of the economics around community solar in a little bit. So how can landowners participate in community solar? As I mentioned before, these solar projects range in size between 1 megawatt and 5 megawatts, which is about 5 acres to 25 acres. So it's not a huge amount of land. But small landowners, small land parcel landowners can really participate here. Most of the economics associated with community solar, if you're a landowner, is tied to the lease. And I've got a slide that walks through the economics related to, what's your farm income versus what the lease income is, and it's always, you're never going to do the deal if it's not better. So typically, it's much better than what your farm income could be. When you're thinking about the right type of land for community solar, or any solar or wind in particular, ideally the land is on or near a substation, electric substation, or it's on or very near to a distribution line that's going to a substation. Ideally, the land is flat. Ideally, the land is clear. If it's flat and it's sloping, ideally it's sloping to the south where the sun's coming in. Renewable energy resource has to be there, so it should be sunny. But Minnesota has a very large program, and it ain't that sunny there. It's just the economics are such that even though the production at the solar project isn't great, the economic incentives in community solar are such that there's a lot of projects that got built there. There's about 700 megawatts of community solar in Minnesota. There's a lot. No wetlands, good roads, limited setbacks. So when setbacks is, sometimes counties have variances or rules about how close a solar project can be to the road or fencing and things like that. So those are considerations that you have to take into account as well. Here's an example of a solar garden. This is in Illinois as an example. 80-acre parcel. You see there's a substation right beside the land. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's a great option. It makes the project a little more economic because you don't have to have a longer connection from your solar project to the substation, because ultimately the power has to get to a substation. This, as you see, is an 80-acre parcel. We've dropped in about 5 megawatts or 25 acres of that 80-acre parcel. Again, no wetlands and good infrastructure there. So that's a GIS map, and what we do is we'll look at land parcels, we'll do the GIS map, and we'll figure out which land is appropriate for solar. This is basically some chatting around what the value proposition is for landowners who participate in community solar. So a solar project gets developed, a project company comes in and says, I want to build a solar project. They typically have to either win a bidding process to actually get that project into the community solar program that's related to the state's legislative requirements and the utilities requirements. But while the project is being developed and looking to get into a community solar program, the landowner gets a development fee payment. So it's structured into the lease. So the lease will have a development period, a construction period, and then an operating period. And the development period could be anywhere from 2 years to 8 to 10 years, depending on how the lease is negotiated, who's participating. The development fee is a fraction of what the landowner will ultimately earn through construction and operating. But at that time, there's nothing happening with the land other than having an option by the project company to develop, build, own, and operate a solar project. Lease terms can range from 20 to 50 plus years. It's really a negotiated point. You need to have at least 20 years typically in order for a project to make economic sense for it to pencil. The benefit associated with solar leases, it's stable income, it's escalating at some inflator. Typically it's CPI, or now it's between 1% and 3%, which can be a negotiated term as well. And so it's a stable source of revenue. This might be hard to see, but this is a snapshot of indicative economic benefits of a project. So this one here, it's like the GIS map I just showed you. It's a 5 megawatt project on about 25 acres of land. The lease term is 30 years. I've made assumptions here. Farm value per acre is $10,000 an acre. This is an indicative area in Illinois, which we have a portfolio coming to market. Assuming the income per acre is 500, and on the project lease, again, we're leasing 25 acres. The lease benchmark here the lease can be 8 to 15% of the value of the property. It's a negotiated rate. So if you've got $10,000 an acre is what your value of your land may be, the lease rate could be $1,000, and that's what I used in this example. And that the development period, we're paying $100 an acre, which is standard. It could be 200 or 300, it could be 50 or 30. It just depends on the market and how things get negotiated. And then the lease payments are $1,000. And so you see the green stack is the cash flow associated with the solar, and the light blue at the bottom is the revenue of the farm, just based on these assumptions. So looks like it's a great value proposition, and it should be in almost every case. Obviously, there's no reason you'd want to put solar on your land unless you're making money. In this instance, the farm income, this is over a 30-year period, the farm income, $600,000, give or take. You see the table in the bottom left, with a net present value using an 8% discount rate of about $178,000. That's if you did nothing, kept your land. Solar developer comes in and says, hey, we're going to develop the solar project. based on the terms there. The income is $1 million and the NPV is $300,000. So it's about 1.7x, 1.8x of what you would make on your land in this example. So generally, it can be very attractive, but you'd want to have solar on your land. Here's a case study. I've got a couple slides here. State of Illinois has an existing community solar program. It's been around since 2019. The two big utilities that are in Illinois that are participating are Commonwealth Edison and Ameren. And so a solar project developer will go and get a piece of land, hopefully near a substation, and then they'd put in into a queue to get to be part of the community solar program in either ComEd territory or Ameren territory. In Illinois, they had this, I guess it's the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. So the goal for Illinois is to be renewable up to 40% by 2030 and then 50% by 2040. Which means a lot of community solar is going to be happening. There's been about 250 megawatts or so of community solar in Illinois, and we think between 150 megawatts and 200 megawatts a year through 2030 at least. So that's 50 projects a year or more in the state of Illinois. For the customers in Illinois that join community solar, there's no cost to join, and you can cancel at any time. And they typically get about a 20% discount on their utility bill. So there's going to be a lot of demand for community solar. In the old days of community solar, there was the understanding that a customer had to basically commit for 20 plus years on a contract to buy their solar. If you're like in the Minnesota, in the earlier program, customers signed up for 20 and 25 years, and they bought it. They had a fixed rate with an escalator for their utility payment, and they had a discount. Their credit from the utility bill gave them a discount. Now the financial markets are such that the structures are coming into place, and the financial markets are accepting of customers being able to cancel at any time. So if you're signing up for the community solar program in Illinois or Colorado or Minnesota now, you usually can drop out at any time. And then the community solar project owner, it's incumbent on them to refresh to get another subscriber. So they typically keep a waiting list to drop in new subscribers. In this case, so Farm First Energy worked with a land manager who had 150 parcels, give or take, in the state of Illinois. And we got our GIS mappers to map each and every one of those properties out, and where were they located? Again, the attributes we talked about before: flat land, near a substation or near a distribution line, no wetlands. And so we culled from about 150 land parcels down to about 23 that we thought were acceptable. And so we bundled those together, and we each one had the ability to put in 25 acres. So basically, the Illinois program, you can go up to 5 megawatts of project size, which again is 25 acres. So we made sure we got the 25 acres for each one of those parcels. Then we worked on a lease that was acceptable to the land manager. And so land manager typically had discretion in this case, so they wouldn't have to go to the other 23 landowners. Basically, they have the discretion to be able to negotiate the lease. Leases are typically very favorable. The reason they're favorable, in part, is because the development fee is a little lower. So we're charging less on the development fee for the project development in order to to pass some of that benefit on in the form of a little more enhanced lease structure and payments. And then what we're doing now is we're going out and talking to the big community solar project owner developers. Hey, we've got 23 parcels, people that are either actively participating in the Illinois community solar market or want to. This is a great opportunity for them to come in and get a huge portfolio of project opportunities. And we're getting tremendous interest in this. The old days, like if you not the old days, but the community solar program project guys, they have to go door to door and knock on doors to try and get somebody to want to participate. Here, we've already got a somebody that's buying into community solar already, and so it's a much smoother process, and so this is a pretty attractive portfolio, and we think it's going to do quite well. What's the deal structure look like? Well, it depends, right? So when you think about community, and you think about this example where we have 23 parcels of land that are being contributed to a portfolio. Projects earn development fees. Typically, you get an upfront payment if a project owner is going to come in and develop what you have in your portfolio. So you get an upfront payment, then you'll get what are called like success fees, right? Okay, you're going to get X cents per watt when the project owner develops, X cents per watt when you start construction and you get a PPA, and X cents per watt when you complete construction. So what we've done here is on the upfront development fee, where typically landowners don't participate at all. In this instance, we're giving 50% of the upfront fee to the whole pool of landowners, all 23 parcel landowners. And then on the success fee, the landowners that contributed property to the portfolio are still getting some form of success fee participation, but 40% of that success fee is going to those landowners where projects are actually being developed, built, and going to be operating. And then, of course, the lease payments are only going to go to the landowners that actually have a project put on their land. So these are indicative economics. Right, I've got here is a penny per watt for an upfront fee and a 9 cent per watt for a success fee. And that's probably not an unreasonable estimate, but it is really just indicative, and yeah, we haven't negotiated and closed on this transaction yet. Any questions on this? Yes?
What's like the ongoing annual maintenance cost for land?
Zero. Yeah. So whoever builds, owns, and operate, they're responsible for all. And there's obligations on the lease in terms of what the project owner has to do, and then there's also township and county rules and regulations about how high is the grass growing. They got to do landscaping and all that stuff there. So, and if it's snowing, they're supposed to be clearing it off. But that's all on the project owner. Yeah. That's it. We got time for a lot of questions. Yes.
Kind of into his question, what in regards to cleanup at the end of the lease and disposal, how does that work?
So cleanup on lease and disposal. So basically, what happens is when the project person that's developing, building, owning that project has an obligation to basically return the land to its original situation. So the panels have to be removed, and the posts that support the solar panels have to be removed, and then the land is reclaimed. And that goes to the owner has to pay for that. And that's part of the lease. Yes?
How do these leases impact liquidity?
Yeah. So the question is, how do the leases affect the land value and land liquidity? What we've witnessed is they tend to be better in terms of their value accrual because you have a stable lease payment, stable and growing lease payment that has higher value on an annual basis than the farm rent. I mean, again, the original landowner would not ever enter into a solar lease if it wasn't going to benefit them economically vis-a-vis what they're already doing with their land, whether it's ag or livestock or what have you. So we found that if the transactions are happening that are more financially driven than somebody else coming in wanting to just farm, definitely it's an attractive, again, stable, growing revenue stream. If somebody wants to, I guess if you're wanting to just farm more land, I suppose it's going to be a little less liquid for those people that are buyers that are looking to maximize the farmable land that they're buying. Yes, sir.
I came late, maybe you said this already, but how wide is the community?
So the question is, like, what's the range of the distribution center? I have to repeat the question. So what's the range of the distribution center? So you have a solar project, a solar farm, community solar farm. People are subscribing to the project owner to buy, commit to 5, 6, 7 kilowatts of electricity. That electricity that's generated by the solar garden just goes onto the grid. So it goes on distribution line to a substation, and then the utility that's associated with the community solar program uses it in their dispatch, right? They just dispatch it. And so if you had a 5 megawatt solar project, that would probably, let me think, that's about 1,000 or so customers that would be subscribing to that solar garden. I don't know if that's answering your question.
But it basically, like, we have Mid-American
Yep.
here. So Mid-American would have to be the one that is partnering with the landowner and the thing in order for me to subscribe to them.
That's right.
So I'd have to be in the Mid-American platform.
Yep.
Do these solar communities ever cut them out entirely and just create, like a home builder goes out and develops 25 acres into a big
Yeah.
housing project?
Yeah, that's a little different. So that's like distributed generation. So that's, somebody, if you're in a HOA, and HOA wants to build its own solar farm, you can do that as well. So it's a different sense of community solar is generally it's a legislative thing at the state level where the state says, hey, we want to let everybody participate in renewable energy. So if you're a renter, or you live in a condo, or you got trees, or you don't have a flat roof, those folks can't participate. They can't put solar, right? Because they're inhibited from doing it. So community solar lets folks sign up and do that. So, but you're right. Like, if there's an HOA, then we've worked with folks in the past that have set up, 500 kilowatt, 1 megawatt type systems where that electricity can be serving that HOA community.
So I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask this again, it's just stupid, I don't know if it's stupid or not, but in your example, if I wanted to subscribe, I would get 10% of the $2.7 million success fee.
Okay,
But
so
I get a percentage of whatever my lease is
Yeah.
from them.
yeah,
If I
so
had to-
no, this is a deal that you do with somebody like us, like a developer. This isn't something that you do with the utility that's there.
No, but I get that. I guess what I'm saying is, how do I find you to do this if I'm a Mid-American customer and you're doing this in Adel, for example, and I wanna be a part of it and I'm living downtown Des Moines,
Yep.
and I just happen to have enough money to buy all that 10% and that's what I want.
Do you have land?
No, okay, the landowner, never mind, it's land, I'm sorry.
This is,
The benefit I get as the downtown user then, it's a discount from the.
that's right. Yeah. So you're a downtown user. You've got your Mid-American utility bill. You sign up for their community solar program with some community solar company that's doing that. And then the landowner is the person that's giving their land up to build the project, and they're getting paid lease rate from the project owner, and they're getting a bit of a success fee as well if the project gets built. Yes?
I think he's asking, if I'm Mrs. Smith and I say I want 6 kilowatts,
Mm-hmm.
how does that, why would I do that as Mrs. Smith sitting in a house?
So let's say your utility bill is $100 a month, right? Mrs. Smith is signing up for the community solar program. They're working with a community solar developer, and she is going to pay that community solar developer $80. And Mrs. Smith will get a $100 credit on her utility bill. So there's an economic, so number one, there's a social incentive, but there's also an economic incentive where the credit is going to be greater than what you're paying the community solar project for your electricity. Even though the electricity is still coming from the utility, it's not coming from the solar garden. It's not intuitive. But thanks for the question. I think it was helpful.
So what is your biggest hurdle in Iowa, your relationship with the utilities? Do you fight that with what they call net zero or
Yeah.
things like that as far as putting power back into the grid? Why are you in those states?
Yeah.
Are those utilities better to work with than what we have?
That's right. Yeah, so I understand the Iowa, I'm from Colorado. I understand the Iowa program. The utility's doing it. So they're creating their own community solar projects and having their own customers participate in community solar. So it's a bilateral arrangement. most states that are promoting and legislated community solar, it's third parties that are coming in, developing the projects, creating the subscriber network, and putting the power onto the utilities grid. Some utilities love it, some utilities don't like it. They're eating their lunch in a sense, right? Because every megawatt that gets developed by an independent is a megawatt of electricity that the utility's not able to develop, build, own, operate.
Continue, I'm in southwest Iowa, and explored it, that our utility will allow them to work on this net zero, whatever you
Yeah.
call it. But yet they're putting in solar fields.
Mhm.
Utility
Yeah.
services,
Uh-huh.
which is, I'm trying to figure out, why this can't work for us, why they want to do it. Obviously, it's a margin in the product, but, do you see that getting changed, I guess, with
Yeah.
utilities are mandated that they allow this type of system?
That's a great question. So why do some utilities really work hard to not participate in the type of community solar projects that we're talking about here and want to do it on their own? Well, they want to build their rate base, right? They want to build their assets, and so Excel is a good example of, they do both. So Excel, they'll develop, build, own, operate their own large utility scale wind and solar projects, and they will let somebody else build, own, and operate these large utility scale projects and enter into a power purchase agreement. And in Minnesota and Illinois, Minnesota and Colorado, where Excel operates, they're also let community solar happen with independence. I'll tell you firsthand, they're not happy. They're slow moving, they're bureaucratic, and it's I wouldn't say it's by design, but it's just I just don't think they're enthusiastic about it because, again, they're not able to build. They're not building their own capacity. Other people are building their capacity for them. Yes, sir.
Do you see that being legislated, or
Yep.
is going to hold all the pie?
Mhm.
For them to be able to let go of any of that, that has to be legislated?
Yeah. So the question is is it legislated to make community solar happen? Yes, it is. So the state Senate has to push legislation through where it then compels. So it's a discussion amongst legislature, the utility commission, and then the incumbent utilities. So it's a cooperative negotiation, if you will, to make it happen. And each state has a different type of program. I mean, New York runs differently than Illinois does, and then Minnesota, than Colorado. But they all tend to. There's some states where the community solar customer actually owns a piece of the community solar garden. So they'll enter into a long-term lease. You've got 1,000 customers. Each of them own a small piece of the solar project. It's a little more complicated. Doing a virtual contract is probably a little more elegant and efficient, but each state is different. Yes, sir.
Question on that. Do these projects work without subsidy? Without subsidization?
Because these projects are smaller, you don't have the economies of scale, so they don't work, frankly, without some sort of subsidy. So that's basically either it's an economic burden on the utility because they're overpaying for their electricity, or two, there's a state mandated renewable energy credit program. So the state will, in the case of Illinois, it's 3 cents a kilowatt hour, give or take, maybe 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour that the project earns on top of the rate that they're getting from their customer. And that's enough to create a positive net present value project. But they typically need to be subsidized. And then the other subsidy associated with these projects is the investment tax credit. So when a project gets built, there's a big tax credit associated with it. It's between, I can't remember what it is right now. It was 30%, but it's declining. And then project owners monetize that investment tax credit through partnership structures that bring in tax equity investors that are best positioned to monetize those investment tax credits. Yes, sir.
Now, do you know where Iowa stands legislatively on
set up in Iowa, do you know, or are there projects here?
How hard or easy is it to set up a community solar program in Iowa? As I understand it right now, there is community solar, but it's being run by the utilities. So an independent community solar project developer, it's not open to them. So I believe, but I don't know the Iowa program really well. I'm not sure if it's ubiquitous, if every customer can sign up, or if it's just in certain regions. Apologies.
So the inevitable day, last week, we had 3 days with no sun, and
Mhm.
the first few days it was 20 and it barely melted the snow.
Yep.
If I'm a subscriber, I'm just gonna run the normal electricity from the power company then?
Yeah, you always do.
For that then, yeah.
No, you'll get your, what happens is the project has to be producing. So if it's not producing, then you're not gonna have to pay as much, right? But you're still gonna get your electricity, from the utility. But yeah, there are projects in Iowa, we had projects in Minnesota where, we had major snowfall. And and it got hard, and you really have to be proactive to clean the snow off the solar panels. If there's snow on the panels, even a small section of a solar panel that has snow on it is going to significantly inhibit how much electricity that panel can generate at that time. So you've got to really be proactive and clean off the panels. Yes, sir.
Well, in Iowa, we have 99 counties, and there's 99 waste or old dump sites that they're not using anymore, they're
Mhm.
covered up.
Yep.
Looks like a great opportunity. I don't know why you couldn't put up solar panels on all them that our counties own, take care of, and they can't do anything.
I would think you're right. If they're sitting there and not being utilized, and they're flat and they're near distribution lines or substations, then yeah, that would be a good candidate for land to be used for solar. 100%. Yes, sir. Good question. When you think about what it costs to build a project, right? You've got the solar panels, the racking system, the development costs, and then you've got your cost to interconnect into the grid. So it's not an immaterial part of the overall project capital costs associated with a solar project. Ideally, you're very near a substation. I mean, when I say very near, ideally you're right there. You're adjacent to it or very close to it. The cost associated with developing basically a distribution, if you had to create your own distribution line to get to the substation, it's $50,000, $100,000 a mile. So it adds up pretty quickly. But I'd say for a 5 megawatt project, if you're within a couple of miles, 5 miles, if you're on a distribution line, you can tie in that way to a 3-phase line, that'll work. So
any three-phase line is considered distribution.
yeah. Right. But yeah, it's the most economic projects are the ones that are going to be right beside substations. But there's many, like most projects aren't, right? So it's just another cost that you have to build into your project model and see what the returns look like. And the other thing that it's not caprice, but what it costs to tie into a substation. Utility has network charges and system charges. So the system charges are really what does it cost to physically tie in to the substation? Do you have to build a new bay? That's typically $50,000 to $500,000 or more. And then the network costs are okay. We're putting more power into the grid. What's the knock-on effect to the entire grid system? So the utility does a system impact study. What the cost will be, both the physical interconnection costs and then the network costs associated with that new line. And it's you don't know until you run the application process. And it's almost like a lottery. You could get really lucky, and because you're in a certain part of the queue system, the interconnection program, where your incremental load that you're putting into the grid has no or limited impact. Then that next 5 megawatts that comes in after, well, that changes everything, and then somebody has to pay another $500,000 to the utility to get that power project onto the grid. Great questions.
Is there a bond typically set up, the solar developer goes bankrupt?
Yep.
Farmer Joe gets stuck cleaning up the mess. Is there typically a bond set up ahead of time that cover that in those instances?
Yes. Yeah, so it depends. It's county by county, but typically the counties will require that you post some bonding for the decommissioning of the project down the road. Yes.
Actually, in Illinois, the Illinois Department of Agriculture has an agricultural impact.
Yep. Thank you. I think we're good. I thank you, everybody. It's been fun chatting with y'all, and any questions after here, just one-on-one, that's fine too. I'll stick around for a while. But appreciate your time and your patience through this. Thank you.